welcome, David. Thank you for joining us nice and early in the UK. We really appreciate you giving us your time.
You're welcome.
David, let's go back and start at the beginning. That's always a good place to start. Tell us how you started your sort of low carb journey, if you like, because you've not always been promoting a low carb diet.
No, for the majority of my career as a GP in the north of England, I was just busy running a practice. We had 9,500 patients, and I was a senior partner, so I was very busy with that. But I had noticed there was a problem because we were struggling under an epidemic of type 2 diabetes. So that when I started as a young man in 1986, we had 57 people with type 2 diabetes. And then fast forward to 2012, and we had 470. So it went from 57 to 470. And the point was, we didn't have any increase in doctors, nurses, or any kind of finance to help care for these people. So come 2012, I'm troubled, really. I was worried by this, and I was very disappointed with the results we were achieving. Nobody seemed to get any better. It was so depressing. I just kept prescribing one drug and then another one and then another one. But the people weren't very grateful. I laugh about that now. No wonder they weren't grateful. They didn't feel very well, and we were under terrible strain. And then there was an additional problem because we started screening for pre-diabetes. And that worried me even more because all we did was just tell people they had pre-diabetes, but we didn't offer them anything. We didn't do anything at all. So particularly the young ones, I was really troubled by that because I thought if you're young and you have pre-diabetes, what's going to happen to you? And I wanted to do something for that group, but there was no finance. There was no finance to do it. So the backdrop to this is a very ordinary GP who was becoming unhappy and troubled, really, because I just knew that I was disappointed in myself. That's what it was. I was disappointed in myself because as a young man, I'd become a doctor full of hope. And then age 55, that hope had all ebbed away because I didn't really feel I was making a difference. And then I suppose really one patient changed everything. One single lady changed everything. And so we were always encouraged to we had to monitor that patients were taking their drugs. And this lady, I knew from the computer records, wasn't taking her drugs. And so I wrote her a letter saying, please come and see me because I'm worried about your diabetic control. And then when she walked into the room, she told me off, and nothing had prepared me for the shock of being told off by this intelligent, scary woman. The first thing I should say is I didn't recognize her when she came in because she'd lost so much weight. She'd lost stones in weight and actually looked fabulous, and I didn't recognize her. She'd lost so much weight. So that was an embarrassing start. And then I think her first salvo was, I'm wondering whether you're medically qualified, Dr. Unwin, which was a terrifying thing to say to me, doctor. And then she followed that up with, it's even worse than that. I'm wondering whether you've got any basic qualifications in biology. So I was shocked. And she said, you've been prescribing me metformin all these years, and you never once mentioned that bread becomes sugar. And that was the start. That was the first absolutely shocking thing, because I knew she was right. And she was plainly very angry. And as you know, Peter, experienced clinicians, if a patient's angry, you better start listening and fast, because otherwise a complaint is coming. So I acknowledged I had something to learn. And, I was just interested to know how she'd lost the weight. And then she added to that. And of course, all my blood sugars are normal now because I'm not having rice, potatoes, and breakfast cereals. And when we did the blood test, she'd put her diabetes into remission, even though she wasn't taking the drugs I thought were so essential. So really a very essential rethink was necessary by me, because I'd missed something. And that was the start of the journey, because once you know something's possible, then you wonder whether it can be replicated. Before you ask your next question, there's just one extra thing I'd like to say. I notice you say reversal of diabetes. I actually prefer the term remission. So I thought this patient had a remission of her diabetes. And the reason I use that is it's a reminder that if you go back to your old diet, then you'll be in the same pickle you were in before. And remission, I think, reminds you of that. And of course, now we've got an international agreement on what we mean by remission of diabetes. That, for me, is an easier term. I don't know, what do you think about that, Peter?
Yeah, I'm happy with remission. I think, as you said, it's internationally agreed now that that there is a definition of remission, and I think we probably all stick to that. Look, we could argue until the cows come home whether it's reversal or remission, or it's just it's terminology. The main thing is we know what's happening, and that
Yes.
that we are making a big difference. So, I mean, a lot of doctors would sort of react to being embarrassed by their patient by denial and pretending that it didn't happen and there was some some other reason. But you obviously went and started to investigate the whole low carb thing.
I did. I was in for a whole series of horrible shocks to my self-esteem and pride. So I asked the lady, well, where did you come up with this? And it turns out she was one of 40,000 people on a self-help group, part of diabetes.co.uk, their low carb forum. And I went on there and I was absolutely astonished. There were 40,000 people doing marvelous work, but the humiliating bit, or the worrying bit, was they were being rubbished by their healthcare professionals and told that what they were doing was dangerous. And so the whole thing was so humbling, these people getting wonderful results, losing lots of weight, getting normal blood sugars, and then being rubbished and told it was dangerous. So I determined to find out more, and I approached the partners. So I was senior partner of the practice, and then I was going to learn some more stuff because the partners were dead against what I wanted to do. I said, could we try this? Maybe just for the pre-diabetics, the ones we're not helping in any way anyway. And the partners, they said, well, we're not paid to do this work. Since when did we start doing stuff for free? And they also pointed out that really I ought to be seeing sick patients and not, as it were, wasting my time trying to help pre-diabetics who could be left. So we had arguments, and it caused problems, let's say that, because I was really wanting to try it. And then, I don't know, some of you may know I've got a brilliant wife, David Unwin. She's a consultant psychologist. And it was her that, again, another lesson from my own wife, because she said, why are you not doing this good stuff? And I said, well, because we're not paid to do it. And then I'll never forget, we were running together on the around the marsh here. And she said, do you know, David, first of all, how many cars have we got? We've a few. And then she said, really, we've enough money. Why are you talking to me about money? I thought I'd married a doctor, not an accountant. So that was so one woman, and then another woman has a go at me. And out of that came the idea that we'd do it for free. So Jen said, right, I'll work for free. So on a Monday night, she staffed it, and one of the nurses volunteered. Heather, our senior nurse, volunteered. And we started doing this work, a low carb approach for initially the pre-diabetics on a Monday night in the waiting room. And because we had no resources, we came up with the idea of doing group consultations. But what was really exciting was, for the first time in my life, I did something with patients instead of to them. So we went on the low carb diet together and learned week on week and met every Monday, and we did cookery demonstrations and so on. And the results were absolutely astonishing. And well, there we are. So that's kind of the start of it, because we started getting results. And allied to that, I'd say the partners that doubted me, and also I got a lot of negative press at the beginning. All sorts of people were really unhappy with what I did. That did me a favor, because I started collecting data right at the beginning in January 2013. And it was that data that later on, first of all, it meant I felt safer because I knew what was happening to my patients, but it was the basis of publishing and encouraging other doctors to do the same. So it's funny in life how things turn around, and my enemies have turned out to be my friends, really. And I should fast forward now. The partnership is entirely low carb. The partners are low carb. The midwife lost 4 stone. The practice manager's low carb. It has transformed the practice in so many ways.
You say you've kept your results. I mean, without going into massive detail, do you want to sort of summarize basically what you've achieved results-wise?
I do, because I'm a rotten show-off. So you're allowing me to show off. I think I suppose the headline figure is that I've got 118 people with type 2 diabetes into drug-free remission, 118. And that's actually 50% of all of the people with type 2 diabetes who choose the low carb approach. So I've got somewhere about 250 people with type 2 diabetes have chosen the low carb approach. And what's really encouraging now is those cases of remission are not all personally mine, but the other doctors in the practice have learned how to do it and are proud to be getting cases of remission of their own. I think the other thing I'd have to say is so there were all sorts of worries about low carb. So people said to me, oh, the lipid profiles will go wrong because they're having extra fat, all of that, all those eggs and the full fat dairy. So right from the start, we were doing cholesterol, triglyceride, HDL, all of that. And I was amazed because the lipid profiles improved significantly, and I've published them. If anybody Googles Unwin and essential hypertension, there's a paper where we detailed what happened to the lipid profiles and the cholesterol. Then the next thing was, I had a surprise. I used to have moderately raised hypertension, so my blood pressure used to be about 160 over 90, that sort of thing. Of course, I never went to a doctor, and I didn't do anything about it, but I discovered when I stood up, I felt a bit faint. When I took my blood pressure, it had improved to about 125 over 70, that kind of thing. And that was happening to lots of patients as well. So not only did we have improving lipid profiles, but the blood pressure improved significantly, so much so that I was taking 20% of all the patients who were on blood pressure medication. I had to stop it because their blood pressure was so much better. So there's a whole series of surprises. And then liver function improved. That was the next thing, liver function. And weight, of course. So I think in total, I've got somewhere over 400 patients in the practice, low carb, either for diabetes or pre-diabetes or fatty liver, that kind of thing. And the average weight loss for those, about over 400 patients, is about 10 kilos. I'm so sorry, in Australia, do you do kilos or pounds or?
No, we're kilos. Yeah, we've moved on.
Right, yeah. So the average weight loss is about 10 kilos. The best weight loss I've ever had is a young man who I saw yesterday. When did I see him? Yes, yesterday. I love this kid. He's 28. He came to me with sleep apnea, so he couldn't breathe in the night, and he wanted bariatric surgery. He was so heavy we couldn't even weigh him. It was impossible to weigh. His initial goal was to be somebody that I could weigh. So we never know. We knew he was somewhere over 168 kilos because that was the absolute limit of all the machines. That boy has lost 12 stone in weight. So he went from 168 kilos and he's now about 92. Astonishing. So there was weight loss, blood pressure, lipid profile. Then the final thing was another woman. I've had trouble. Another woman stood up in Ireland and she was a dietitian, and she said, why aren't you worried about the renal function? Because they're having extra protein. And we all know that increasing protein is putting a strain on the kidneys. And actually, I hadn't thought to monitor kidney function. I'd not noticed anything, but that's the basis of the last paper I published about 6 months ago. And when we audited that very carefully, there were significant improvements in renal function as well. And I'd missed it. You miss things if it's a small change, but the change was ubiquitous. So many people had a small change that I'd actually missed that improvement. But yeah, renal function improved. So I could go on and on. You know, they sleep better, their skin's better, they come off medication. But the most important thing is how cheerful they are and how proud and in charge of. They're not really patients anymore. I think that's key. They're people looking after themselves. They don't actually need me, apart from to say well done. So the boy that I saw yesterday, I mean, imagine that as a consultation, Peter. Contrast that. So 2 years ago, he comes asking for bariatric surgery and a sleep apnea clinic, and every aspect of his life. Imagine his life. You know, he couldn't. If he bent over, he couldn't breathe. He couldn't fasten his shoelaces. Life was really hard, and he was a young father as well. And then he just walks in to say, "Well, I just thought I'd like to be weighed again." And you know, he's running. This kid is running, and so we discussed half marathons. It's real magic, isn't it? So yeah, mental health improves, pride. Lots and lots of things improve. I'm hopelessly biased. I should say that. You should declare these things. I'm hopelessly biased in favor of low carb, but not financially biased, but I am biased.
Well, you see the results, yeah. I mean, there are a couple of things there. I mean, the running thing's interesting because people always say you've got to run to lose weight, but the reality is you've actually got to lose weight to run. And when you lose weight, you actually feel like running, and you feel completely different. So that's turned things around. The liver, the fatty liver, is something that I can relate to. I mean, I'd had fatty liver for 10 years, you know, and like your blood pressure, I'd never seen a doctor and totally ignored it. And I didn't really understand what a fatty liver was. I was on a low-fat diet, and I thought, well, that must be all right, and had no idea really. I just can't believe how ignorant I was, really. And you know, my 3 months of low carb, my fatty liver that I had for 10 years disappeared in 13 weeks. It might have disappeared quicker. I only did the blood test after 13 weeks. So it's just astonishing. And when you have results like that, I mean, it's just so inspiring. One point you said that 50% of your patients get into remission. Now I don't want our listeners to sort of think the other 50% have failed, because they've also done lots of positive things, haven't they?
Yeah. So when we've audited that, I'm often asked that because people wonder whether the other 50% died, So we've audited that. And when you if we look at the entire cohort that go low carb, at the end of 2 years, I think, and we've published on this, but I think it's 97% of the cohort have improved blood sugars, 97%. Now that's astonishing. That's astonishing. And the other message, I'm all about messages of hope. So my next paper is going to be about what predicts remission, so that patients and clinicians can find out what predicts remission. But quite aside from remission, when we analyzed the data, we found that people with the worst controlled diabetes, the ones with the highest hemoglobin A1C, get the biggest drops. So that you have two things going on. One is remission, which is wonderful. But actually, if you have really poorly controlled diabetes, if you could achieve mitigation and your diabetes was in better control, because we know that poorly controlled diabetes is linked to mortality. So getting improved control of your diabetes is really important. So 50% get remission and 47% get an improvement in their diabetic control. And that's really worth playing for. Just to come back to the other point about fatty liver, because I think it's such an interesting thing. I love the work of Roy Taylor, Professor Roy Taylor at Newcastle University. And he has a wonderful quote, which is, you have a long silent scream from the liver before you develop type 2 diabetes. And the link between fatty liver and type 2 diabetes is that the fat in the liver interferes with the good work of insulin, and that's how you gradually become insulin resistant, which is the very beginning of diabetes. And we know now, I think it's a quarter of the entire developed world have fatty liver. So far more people have fatty liver and will go on to develop type 2 diabetes than perhaps those people are unaware, like you, Peter, and they don't know. And I know if you follow liver function carefully, it improves in weeks. We followed that up, and liver function improved in weeks if you cut out the sugar. Robert Lustig's work, of course, in North America, where he's equating, he says really your liver cells can't tell the difference between sugar and alcohol, and I think that's a very good point.
So, David, I mean, to you and me, this is all pretty obvious now. We've been down our own low carb journey, and we've seen lots of our patients do well. And yet, still, the majority of the medical profession, the dietitians and others, are, let's say, skeptical, reluctant to embrace it, and sometimes, or quite often, downright antagonistic towards it. I mean, why do you think that is? Just first question, and secondly, what can we do about it? Nice, easy question for you.
That is, that's a very complex question. Nothing prepared me for the hostility back in 2013 that I was going to face. So I was all shiny and sort of delighted and keen, and I thought I must tell the world that I'm getting these results. And some people were intrigued, but others I could not understand. They were furious. I was actually shouted at. I was heckled and shouted at in medical meetings. And I could not understand it, because here was, I'm all like, I've come to tell you this great thing and it's working really well, and this is happening and that. And yet people were furious. As I said in the beginning, they said, oh, there'll be vitamin deficiencies. I was told so I was saying, well, I wonder which vitamin deficiencies. And then that died down, and then, the lipid profiles will be bad. So why? I don't know. I mean, let's be fair, it's very difficult. As I had done a thing, and so had you, Peter, for many years. And it's embarrassing because we were wrong. And it is quite hard. I found it hard. It is hard, that horrible dawning realization, because you want to think you're doing a good job. And I think it is really, really hard. And I think the more senior you are, the more your career depends upon being right. I'm just a GP, so maybe that's not so difficult. But what if you were really senior and you'd been sort of talking low fat for a long time? So I think that's part of it, that it was shaking people. I think some people, their actual understanding of physiology was not good. And so they just defaulted to guidelines without trying to understand the physiology. And that's what I rapidly began to research carefully. What's the physiology? What's really going on? I think another thing, again, to be fair, I think a lot of clinicians are overworked and, like we were in the practice, 10-minute appointments, under-resourced. And you get this zealot, this mad person saying, come on, everybody, let's do this extra job. Maybe they were tired and they already had a day job, and not everybody's mad. But I will say over the years, you know, things have changed a lot in the UK, and low carb now. So I I co-authored a review paper published in the journal for the British Dietetics Association. So this is a review of dietary approaches to type 2 diabetes. 5 very senior dietitians and 5 clinicians. And that paper is published in the British Dietetics Association's own journal, and it's open access. And it says low carb is safe, low carb is appropriate. If patients like it, then it's fine. And that if it's a diet you like and you can stick to, then that's great. So that, for me, is an amazing transformation from being heckled and shouted at. And I would say it was particularly dietitians in the early days who were worried. And in fact, the dietitian in the practice, her boss, so she worked with me to do this. She actually helped me produce the low carb diet sheet. And her boss took her away from the practice. And we've never been allocated a dietitian ever again in 10 years. And that young dietitian was keen, she knew what she was doing, but her boss hated the approach so much. And that's partly why we had to learn to do it ourselves, because we would have liked a dietitian, but we weren't allowed one. The other thing, in the UK, the press have been very helpful. We've had terrific support from, so our most read paper is the Daily Mail. And I think they've had me now write about 30 separate articles for the Daily Mail. We did a documentary for BBC One that was seen by 4 million people. All the radio stations I've been in, I think all the papers. So that the media have been really helpful. And then to come to, you did ask 2 questions, didn't you? What can we do about it? I think a lot of this what happened to me is happening to many other doctors. So what happened to me was I met a patient who I cared about, who had changed her life, and that woke me up. And across the UK now, there are thousands of GPs doing low carb. I know there are. And many of them have learned from patients. They've seen success and had the curiosity to wonder, well, why did that happen? And then when they've looked into it, or some of them have done it on themselves. And I think social media is turning out to be very, very powerful. It's the first ever true grassroots medical revolution. So I learned from those 40,000 people. They weren't doctors. They were ordinary patients. So I think it's beginning to flow up from patients into primary care. But now there are endocrinologists and specialists around the world who like this approach. And when I came to Australia, I got a really warm welcome and met thousands of people doing this who are really convinced. On a cheerful day, I'm optimistic. I think we're doing well, because at the end of the day, you can't get away from the single fact that if this is about good blood sugar control, if mortality and morbidity are linked to good blood sugar control, then mostly a high blood sugar is something you ate. 95% of high blood pressures I see in clinic after clinic are something you ate. Sometimes it's drugs that somebody was given, or stress, or they're very ill. But most people are high blood sugar. I'm saying, what have you eaten recently? And that's kind of logic that my first patient was shocked that I hadn't got.
And what about sort of politically, really? I mean, in the NHS, you've now got approval of in some sort of level
Yes.
from the NHS in your country, and governments seem to be listening. Is that just because of the media coverage, or what else have you been able to do to influence policy
Yeah.
in the UK?
Well, we're advancing on a fairly broad front in the UK, so that there are several of us publishing when we can, publishing real world data. And then there's the social media that's coming on very well. And then we've got the ordinary media. And again, so many articles in there. If you Google keto or low carb, there's huge interest in that. And I think the health service, we struggled, because we spend £1 billion a year on drugs for diabetes, and the results in England alone, we've got 1 million people with poorly controlled type 2 diabetes, and those people are losing 1/3 of their life expectancy. So what we are doing in England is not working. The approach is simply, we're drowning and we're spending huge amounts of money and we're not getting bang for our buck. So increasingly in health economics, people are looking at Norwood Avenue, where my practice saves. We're saving £68,000 every year on the drugs for diabetes because I'm not needing them. So that's intriguing people in the Treasury and politicians, because if you could find a way that patients liked, that saved money and amputations and all the rest of it, surely this is a win-win approach, and it's a logical approach, at least one to investigate. And I think in the UK, we're quite big on patient choice and collaborating with patients, so that if patients are interested in a thing, you should at least explore it with them. And so the patient voice is fairly loud here, and that's helping.
You said there that it's easy to do. I mean, there's a lot of negativity out there. A lot of people say, "Oh, I could never do keto," or "I can never give up bread," or I could never give up this, and so on. How do you approach those sort of people?
That's a brilliant question, and I'm asked that all the time. And I realize now, again, learning from myself, I used to meet a lot of patients who didn't take my advice before 2012. And when I look back, it's because I was lecturing them, and I was in such a hurry to tell them what they should do. I'd missed out on a really key stage, and that is motivation. So if patients are saying, I couldn't possibly live without bread, we've missed a stage, because we're telling them what to do before we've motivated them. So if you took somebody with diabetes, I'm saying you've got different futures. We could start lifelong medication today if you want, but I think there's something else we could do that might mean you'd never need medication and your health could improve in lots of ways. Now, I'd like to tell you about that. Are you interested? And then there's a pause, because I'm asking permission. And what I found, if you do it in that polite way, I have not met a single person who isn't interested to learn how they could avoid lifelong medication. I have not met a single patient who said, I'll have the metformin today. Not one. And that's what Jen has taught me. The idea of motivation is key. And you've got to hook people. You've got to interest them. They have to understand, why should I do this difficult thing? So I motivate them and then tell them how to do the difficult thing. And then you have to offer them support. You can't just do this, off you go. One of the most important things we've learned is you need ongoing support, because the world is obesogenic. Everywhere you go, it's cake, breakfast cereal, a treat. And so we put a lot of energy in the practice into ongoing support. And I think that's what they need, ongoing support to stick to what works. It's so difficult. So yeah, I used to get that, people who said I couldn't possibly give up bread. But you know, I haven't really heard that for a long time now.
Good. Well done. David, I'd love to. I've got 1,000 things I'd love to chat to you, but I don't want to hog you. There are lots of people out there wanting to ask questions, I'm sure. So, Zoe, would you like to maybe pass on some of those questions to David?
Okay, so let's get into some of the questions that have been pouring in from people. First of all, one of the questions that's come in is that they've noticed that there's a lot of dairy when you're eating low carb, very similar to keto. And there's a general question as to whether or not you can have too much dairy. They feel that their body can become a bit bloated and unwell when they're eating too much.
Very good question. So I think I've got a new model, really. Let's all see ourselves as a lifelong experiment. And different things suit different people. And you start low carb. When you're on a lot of junk food, you don't get any of the messages that your body is sending you. You feel weird or old or exhausted nearly all the time. Then you go low carb and you can say, well, this is a better day. I wonder why. This is a worse day. I wonder why. So if you find that dairy makes you feel sluggish or bloated, well, that could be a message that for you it's not a great thing. And certainly some people are lactose intolerant, in which case dairy isn't a great thing for them. So for myself, for instance, I cannot eat cheese. It makes me really ill. But I can have full fat yogurt and I can have butter. Oh, and I can have double cream, but I can't have much milk because it makes me unwell. So milk and cheese I cannot have. Only I didn't know that cheese made me ill. It gives me terrible bellyache. I didn't know that because I had bellyache nearly all the time. But now I've refined it. So for me, I can have full fat dairy, but not all. So I'd say to that person, don't have something that this isn't a rule. It isn't a rule. There's loads of tasty things you can eat that don't have to be dairy. Maybe dairy isn't good for you. Experiment and notice what suits you. But at the same time, measure your blood sugar, measure your waist circumference and your weight. And between those, they will teach you the way to refine your diet. My patients who've been on it for a long time, their diet now is not the same as it was 5 years ago. They've learned so many things. Being a sort of citizen scientist, really.
I think you've made a really good point there. I'm very grateful that I don't run a business that forces me to give up cheese, because I don't think I could do it. Another question that has come in is asking about the relationship between low GI food and low carb. Perhaps, Peter, you can explain a little bit more about that for us.
Well, low GI food is basically carbohydrates that have a lower impact on your blood glucose. And David has actually produced these amazing infographics that show the impact of food on or the equivalent of sugar on your blood. And low GI are certainly less harmful than the higher GI foods, but they still contain carbohydrate, and they're still, if you are type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic or morbidly obese, you probably should be avoiding even the low GI food as well, but certainly the higher GI food. What's your approach to low GI, David?
It's a very well, the glycemic index is a very useful model. It's a model that helps people understand how foods may impact their blood sugar. And if our goal is a better control, a lower blood sugar, it's handy for patients to know what might put their blood sugar up. And so I see the whole thing as a spectrum, Peter. Most of my patients are on a massive amount of sugar and starchy carbs when they first come to me. So first of all I want them to do is move along the spectrum to lower carb. And a lower GI at that point is really useful, very useful. And for some people, it's all they need. If you're having, I have patients and they may be having 400 grams of carb a day easily. So for them, even if they go down to 120, that's great progress. And some of them get remission of their diabetes. So if that works, great. But for some people, they're better, but not good enough. And they want more. They want to be either slimmer or fitter in some way, or a better blood sugar. And for them, they're starting to go into the either from low GI to low carb or even keto. And that's part of the ongoing support they get in the practice to help people personalize their diet to get the results they're hoping for and to make the changes that make a difference.
Yeah, I think there's a right amount of carbs for everyone, and you've just got to find what that right amount is for you, and that sometimes that's trial and error. And sometimes people like to start off really hard. They might start off very low carb keto and then get their diabetes under control and then gradually back off. Others might, as you say, move from high glycemic to low glycemic and gradually lower their carbs until they get good control. So there's different ways of doing it, but it's finding the right amount of carbs. The other way that has most recently become available to monitor the impact of foods on your blood glucose is a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, which we're encouraging a lot of our patients to wear. It's just a patch you wear on your arm that you can continually monitor your blood glucose on your mobile phone, and you can see the effect that any particular food has on your blood sugar. And it varies. Foods can have different effects on different people. So we can't say, potato is going to have X effect on you. It's going to vary, and the best way to find out is to use a continuous glucose monitor. And I certainly encourage people to do that. I'm assuming you do as well, David.
I love in the UK we use the Freestyle Libre, and I love it because behavior change is all often based on feedback, and the more rapid that feedback is, the more effective it becomes. So either finger sticking, where you check the blood sugar an hour after you've eaten something, or the Freestyle Libre, the continuous, gives wonderful feedback. And some people have surprising results. I had one patient and we couldn't work out where the sugar was coming from. We couldn't work out. And for her, it was a combination, I think, of sweet corn, but she was having loads, and pints of milk. And she hadn't thought to tell me. And again, so for me, if I'm struggling with a patient and I can't work out where the sugar's coming from, that's one way to find out. Yeah, really helpful.
I think what you mentioned ago, David, about keto, and one of the questions that has come in is asking, what is the difference between keto and low carb?
Right. Well, they're very similar, so it is confusing. We have to go back to insulin now. So insulin has a special job to do. It pushes sugar out of your blood where it's actually damaging and inside cells for energy or to be turned into fat. But insulin does another thing. It stops you from being able to burn fat. And we are actually a dual fuel engine. We're two good sources of fuel. One is sugar and one is fat. But if you are medium carb, that means medium insulin. That insulin is stopping you from being able to become a fat burner. Idea of becoming a fat burner because they have a lot of weight to lose. So for them, going keto, which is very low carb, usually under 50 grams of carb, probably under 30, means that the insulin level is so low that they are then burning fat as their main fuel. And that's called being in nutritional ketosis. And most of the time I run on fat, I've been in nutritional ketosis for years. So that's my preferred fuel. So I hope that explains it. So there's low carb, medium low carb, and very low carb. Very low carb is usually means that the insulin levels are so low that itself means you're burning fat, and that is being in ketosis, using fat as fuel, and that becomes a keto diet at that point.
Peter, is the Defeat Diabetes program a low carb program, or is it a keto program? How would you describe it?
Well, it's primarily a low carb program, but as David said, I mean, keto is really an extreme sort of form of low carb diet. And as I said previously, I mean, everyone has their sort of level that they need. And some people who are very insulin resistant need to be on a ketogenic diet with a carb intake of less than 30 or 50 grams, as David mentioned. But the majority of people don't need to be. The majority of people can control their diabetes or their pre-diabetes with a low carb diet, which is something under 100 grams, probably under 120 grams. So, but it's a little bit of trial and error. It's a matter of finding what's right for you. As I said before, what a lot of people do is they go hard, go early. They're pretty strict initially, and then once they've achieved their improved their metabolic health, stabilized their blood glucose, they can back off a little bit and try and insert some forms of healthy carbs and see what effect it has on them. And then they usually find out the right sort of balance. David?
Yeah, I've just about that experimentation. So we're relentlessly fascinated by our successes, but also by our failures, Peter. And when we looked into the people who initially did well and then failed, we found something really, really interesting. And that was that the great majority of them were actually carb addicts who could not moderate. So they did early and hard. They cut out the bread or the potatoes or whatever it was. But then sooner or later, there's a holiday or Christmas or whatever. And then they go bad as ever, back to it. And those people, when you talk to them and say, do you think you could be addicted to carbs? They say, definitely. They know. And for them, moderation is impossible. And that was part of my very poor advice at the very beginning, because I always taught moderation for bread. And I can tell you, there are many people who cannot eat one slice of bread. Many people who can't manage a small piece of cake. I was one of those. So I know I couldn't eat one biscuit. I'd have 6. And if I was stressed, it would be more. And so we've really begun now to research carb addiction as a very significant problem in the maintenance of people's improvement.
That's a nice segue, actually, David, into the next question, which is, do I have to stay low carb to stay in remission? And I think for many people, this is something they struggle to get their head around. I think we're sort of trained to do a diet for a short period of time, and then, they actually kind of want us to fail so that then you go into the cycle, you put all the weight back on again, and then you start another diet. But I think a low carb approach is slightly different.
I'll never forget, it was one of the very first 18 patients that worked with me on the Monday night, called Elizabeth. Very clever woman. And she said, I've suddenly thought something, Dr. Unwin. She said, I'd previously been on diets, and I'd been on very many diets. A diet is something you're on and you will come off it. Low carb for somebody with type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle. And what you have to do is tailor it so that you love it and you can enjoy it, because it's lifelong. It's lifelong. Because if you have type 2 diabetes, the very thing you cannot really deal with is moderate to large amounts of carbohydrate. So in my own personal journey, it's been about learning to cook, learning to really enjoy low carb food so I don't feel cheated. And that is difficult. And people, over the years, people have many lessons to learn. And again, that ongoing support is key for when they drift. And Christmas and holidays, I do a lot of work around those. I get people to anticipate problems and plan. How will you deal with Christmas? How will you deal with that cruise you're going on where all the food is paid for in advance? Those sort of things.
That's why I don't like the term diet. I think, to me, a diet is something temporary. So I'd try and not refer to this as a low carb diet. You know, it's a low carb approach or a low carb program and so on. Because as you say, this is something that's a lifestyle. It's permanent, and it's not something temporary. So let's not use the word diet, shall we?
If I could just add, it's only a quick thing, Zoe, this, and I know we must answer as many questions as possible. It's a lifestyle, but it's also an evolving lifestyle. It's an iterative process that you go round and round, improving and tinkering. And my diet now isn't the same as it was 2 years ago. So it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey where you get feedback and tweak depending on how it looks and how it feels. Sorry, Zoe, over to you.
No, that's very good advice. Thank you, David. Okay, so we do have quite a few questions to get through. We'll be wrapping up around 6 o'clock, so we'll try and get through as many of these as possible. A question has come in. How easy is it to be vegetarian and still adhere to a low-carb diet? I know this is something that our members are often asking us. Any advice, Peter or David?
David?
Yes, I get asked that question a lot, and I've got one or two resources for you. We have quite a number of Asian people, and they might be vegetarian as part of their belief system, so you have to try and work with that. I actually like the website D-Life India. I think there are 1,200 vegetarian and some vegan recipes on that website, D-Life India, and I've had some delicious food cooked by my patients from that. And all sorts of websites have addressed the vegetarian and the vegan option. Sourcing quality protein is a challenge, and also you'd have to watch out for vitamin deficiencies, but people do it. And I've got patients who have done it. It's slightly more difficult, but it's really worthwhile. So D-Life India. Peter, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit easier if you're just vegetarian, and so you can have fish, for instance. So that provides a lot of the protein and vitamins that you mentioned. It's certainly it is more difficult. It's challenging, and the main issue is the quality of the protein. And so it's really important to address make sure that you get really good plant protein, good quality plant protein, to ensure you have sufficient protein. But there's certainly it's certainly quite possible, and you can have delicious low carb vegetarian and vegan meals. There's no doubt about that.
I've just on that very subject, I just published one of my sugar infographics on this, and if it just a quick hint, if you compare the so if you look at 100 grams of wheat flour, that's going to affect your blood sugar to the same extent as about 13 teaspoons of sugar. If you look at gram flour, which is chickpea flour, that in Asian cooking they use that instead of flour, it's loads better. It's got a lot more protein, and it's got less than a quarter of the sugar, probably a fifth of the sugar compared to white flour. So that's an easy swap. So it's sort of lentils and gram flour can be an improvement, more protein, less sugar.
Thanks, David. Next question. How likely is low-carb healthy fat to be effective for a person who has been prescribed insulin to manage their diabetes? I guess that's a question for you, David.
So, well, there are two reasons that somebody might have insulin. There might be a type 1 diabetic who can no longer produce insulin for themselves, in which case insulin is keeping them alive. For the type 1s, though, some of those try low carb and need a lot less insulin. They still need insulin, but they need rather less. And there can be advantages because they're not chasing all the time a high blood sugar, insulin, the low blood sugar, more sugar, up and down, up and down. And in the UK, there's Dr. Ian Lake, who's got a website on that very subject. My speciality is type 2 diabetes. And in this condition, you are producing insulin, but it's not working well. So some people with very severe type 2 diabetes are given insulin to try and help the situation. For them, if when they go low carb, they need to cooperate with their physician. It's really important because they're going to need less insulin. And quite a number of them do come off insulin altogether. And I have patients of my own who've come off insulin with my help because they were previously high carb, compensating with extra insulin. And then as they go low carb, they need guiding as those insulin requirements go down. Otherwise, there's a risk of a hypo. So it is possible. I've got plenty of patients on insulin who need less, and quite a number of them have come off insulin altogether, but with help. And it's quite a technical business. You can't just do that by yourself. You would need whoever's prescribing that insulin to work with you. And you'd probably need very careful blood sugar monitoring, one of the continuous devices. So normally if I'm helping somebody with type 2 diabetes to reduce or potentially come off the insulin, I get them on a continuous glucose monitor so I know what's happening. And just a quick message of hope. I actually, again, yesterday, was it yesterday? Yes, it was. Yesterday, I saw an 83-year-old man who I'd helped come off insulin, 2 to 3 years ago. And he came to see me. And that, of course, has really changed his life because he was had brittle control. And so driving was a real worry for him. And his weight was a real worry, both of which he's sorted out. So it is possible for people with type 2 diabetes, with the physician's help, to either need less insulin or some of them come off it altogether.
And we've had a number of people who've gone through our Defeat Diabetes program who've come off insulin, working in conjunction, in close cooperation with their GP or their endocrinologist. So it's definitely possible, and it should be an aim. Really, I think it's and the benefits are enormous if you can get off insulin. Insulin is not a drug that you really want to be on if you can help it.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Penultimate question, and I guess it's the golden question. How long does it take to be on low carb and get off all medications? David, can you answer that one in 2 minutes or less?
Yes, I can. It varies. It depends. So it depends on how poorly controlled is your diabetes and how many drugs are you on. So many people are just on metformin, in which case most of my patients are off metformin within 2 to 3 months. I usually reduce the dose first, then stop it and see what happens to the blood sugar. I had a patient recently who came to me, and when she came to me, she was taking 13 tablets a day. And that has taken me 2 years. But what a journey, and what a worthwhile journey for that person to be free of tablets. She can't believe it. She's so happy. And it's been a privilege for me to help her. Such wonderful medicine. So it varies, but on average, about 6 months usually sorts you out. And then the job is again maintenance, because if you go back to the sugary stuff, then you'll have a high blood sugar, and then maybe you need the drugs. So it needs lifelong monitoring, at least, to check your blood sugar is okay.
Okay, and final question to both of you, and maybe Peter will kick off with you, is I'm curious, can you describe your day on a plate? So I think by that they want to understand what it is that you would eat on an average day.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I've eaten today. I have 1 of 2 breakfasts. I have a cooked breakfast. So today I had my cooked breakfast. I had a bit of time, so I cooked a couple of poached eggs with some bacon and some avocado, and some coffee. I haven't had anything since. I had that sort of late morning. I had that probably about 11 o'clock, because you don't need to have breakfast. You don't need to eat first thing in the morning. So I had that sort of mid-morning, and then I'm looking forward to dinner tonight. I'll have, I think tonight we're having baked salmon with some green vegetables, and I might have some berries and cream for dessert, and that's about it. My indulgence is that I have a little piece of dark chocolate with a coffee after dinner, and but yeah, I mean, I eat. The main thing is that I eat real food. You know, I don't eat processed food, and I think if you just stick to that, you're not going to go too far wrong. How about you, David?
Well, I haven't eaten breakfast for years. We used to think it was the most important meal on the day. And I just found I wasn't hungry. So I thought I'd rather lie in bed for 10 minutes. So I don't eat breakfast. Today, I'm going to have, so lunchtime, I've got some cold lamb, which I really like, with salad and pickles. And then this evening, my 4 grandchildren are coming, and they're keto grandchildren, the healthiest kids you'll ever see. And so we always have the same thing, really. So they will expect loads of meat. They'll expect loads of green veg. And they always say, I want a sea or an ocean of cheese sauce. So they always say a sea isn't enough. We want an ocean of very cheesy cheese sauce on the green veg. And then we always call it Papa's pudding. So we get whatever berries it is, and I whisk that with double cream and some vanilla. And it's either, today it'll be strawberries probably and raspberries, and we've got some black currants in the garden. So we'll get the kids to gather those, and then we'll whisk them up with a hand whisk, which they all will try and help. And then we do the thing. There's a lot of arguing over who gets the biggest portion, and they argue between themselves about that's bigger, no, that's bigger. So normal kids, really greedy, and then I'll have coffee and cream afterwards. And again, 90% I like the Lindt dark chocolate. I'll probably have some of that. I might have a few Brazil nuts or something. If it was a very special occasion, I'd have a glass of champagne, but today isn't a very special occasion.
Well, David, you had me at cheese sauce. David and Peter, thank you so much for a very fascinating conversation. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions. For those of you who've posted in the feed, with the Defeat Diabetes team, we'll be jumping in to answer all of those. And if you'd like to watch the replay, please just head to our YouTube channel, Defeat Diabetes.